So as you all have been following here on this channel and all sorts of other great friends of the show like Brian Berletic and the Duran and all of them, they've been talking about what's happened to Germany since the Ukraine crisis or the conflict in Ukraine, NATO's war in Ukraine, whatever you want to call it. This situation, this special military operation from Russia in the European response has been a disaster for Germany, not least because Germany was so reliant upon and benefited from cheap Russian energy, especially gas. And that was the whole idea behind Nord Stream, the pipelines, 1 and 2, the network of pipelines. It was to ensure that Germany could power its industries because Germany has a powerful industry. So it was all about helping German industry make more profits so that Germany would grow as an economy. Well, what happened in September of 2022? Nord Stream was destroyed, and Seymour Hersh has revealed, let's not beat around the bush here. Let's not act like it's not true. The United States destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. But even so, even before that, throughout this whole period, what Germany has done is make itself completely and utterly subservient to U.S. foreign policy diktats. And now this isn't necessarily a new phenomenon, but what the Ukraine conflict, the proxy war the U.S. is waging did was it solidified, cemented, and absolutely intensified the vassaldom, the vassal status of Germany. And so you heard, right, about midway through this conflict, up until this point, right, last year, Angela Merkel said it herself. The Minsk Accords were a sham. Germany was going through the motions just to get Ukraine ready. So even all the way back to the Minsk Accords, Germany was kissing the U.S. ring, doing whatever they wanted, no matter if it was going to harm their interests. So as Ray McGovern said here on this program, hey, Germany, did you help the U.S. destroy the Nord Stream pipeline? Well, now that that story broke early last month, early February, by Seymour Hersh, Germany and the United States kind of have to tread a little differently, a little more lightly, a little more stealthily. So Olaf Scholz, with his hands between, with his, tail between his legs, comes to the White House. And there was barely any press coverage, interaction with the press. There was barely any murmurs or statements made. There wasn't a lot made of this visit. And I'm going to show you just how embarrassing this was, because you had German media, as the thumbnail shows here on this stream. The German media did, or at least one German magazine did, show the relationship. It showed how Germany and German leadership under Olaf Scholz has basically been walked around like a toddler by Big Daddy USA. And that is how the relationship has been. And so, of course, no real questions were taken by the press. Everything was kept under wraps during this meeting. And what they emphasized were a few things. And I'm going to show you the readout because it's incredibly short. And this just shows how Germany and the United States are playing a game here. Look at this readout. So on March 3rd, it says here, President Joe Biden met with Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany. Look at it. It's one paragraph long. And I can tell you it's not the most impressive paragraph. It's not. It's a very short paragraph that tells you absolutely nothing about what was actually talked about. So Joe Biden welcomed Olaf Scholz of Germany to the White House today on March 3rd to reaffirm the strong bilateral relationship of the U.S. to Germany. At the one-year mark of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, the leaders discussed ongoing efforts to provide security, humanitarian, economic, and political assistance to Ukraine and the importance of maintaining global solidarity with the people of Ukraine. They reiterated their commitment to impose costs on Russia for its aggression as long as necessary. The leaders also exchanged perspectives on global issues. So basically, they didn't want to tell you nothing, and they didn't want to take any questions from the press. They didn't want anyone to ask them about the Nord Stream situation. That's for damn sure. So essentially, Germany came with its tail between its legs, Olaf Scholz waltzed into the White House and said, Joe Biden, what do you want from me? What do you want me to do? Because that's been the relationship up until this point throughout this conflict. They have been put into a status of subservience. Germany is just completely and utterly humiliated. Now, I'm going to play a great interview, actually. You should watch the whole interview. But Brian Berletic, he was asked a question by George Galloway over at the Mother of All Talk Shows. I've been a guest on this show. It's a very fun program, informative program, hosted by George Galloway, former MP, leftist MP. So I'm going to put on this interview because I want to show you Brian Berletic. He's a friend of the show. He'll be on later this month. He had this to say about, and I completely agree with him, about how Europe has been impacted by this conflict. So here's what he had to say, and then we'll continue.
Well, one of the most salient facts of the last 12 months has been the success of American policy in subjugating Europe. Little soldier Schulz, the German chancellor or pretender, was utterly humiliated by Joe Biden. And that's quite an achievement, because Joe Biden can't bite his nails, as we say in Scotland, but he was able to there he is there on the front cover. Look at that. How damning is that front page of little Schulz with his rather cool looking grandfather?
I can't help but laugh at Galloway's commentary here, because just the little Schultz with big Joe Biden, and the fact that Joe Biden is already so just absolutely unstable, and he's not really the, I guess, image of what you'd consider to be a strong man leader hailing over and dominating over Germany, right? Joe Biden doesn't really give you those vibes, but that's exactly what's happening here.
The success of having bent Europe to its will, you can't take that away from Joe Biden, really, if you're looking at it purely from short-term American interest, Brian.
I agree with that. We have to remember, this is the U.S. waging a proxy war against Russia. The goal here is to weaken Russia, undermine it, divide and destroy it. But also at the same time, the U.S. seeks hegemony over all allies and adversaries alike. It was never in the cards for Europe to have any sort of independent foreign or domestic policy. It was always meant for the U.S. to dominate Europe as well as Russia. And then this extends to Asia as well. They don't want to see any nation with an independent, self-reliant foreign policy. And I think they've demonstrated that. If Ukraine is this proxy they're waging this war with, I believe it extends to all of Europe. Europe is also a US proxy. And we can see leadership in Europe, if you could call it leadership, making decisions that favor Washington at the expense of European nations and the people living there.
So Brian is exactly right here. And, you know, what's so interesting about this, in my opinion, is that what the NATO war in Ukraine has done is it has turned on its head what has been a tradition. So oftentimes within the last century or so, especially in the last 70 plus years since the US became the superpower, Europe has tried to model itself as almost like a junior partnership. So while Europe had kind of acknowledged that, yeah, they're not at the same level in terms of economic stature and military stature as the United States, that because they share similar models and visions for the world, because they share a very similar worldview and a system of exploitation, that would unite them. And unfortunately, the miscalculation here for Europe is that the United States goes it alone, meaning the United States views itself as the only thing worthy of self-preservation, that its interests, its class interests, its economic interests, its imperial and foreign policy interests, that's what matters the most. And the minute that Europe would become useful to U.S. foreign policy interests in an exploitative way, meaning that the United States needed to now take from Europe to an extent where now Europe needed to become a vassal of the United States, the U.S. was going to do it. And honestly, the Bretton Woods system, everything that transpired after 1945 essentially cemented that role for the U.S. The reason why the U.S. didn't enter World War II as soon as it could have was because it wanted to see just how much damage Western Europe could take, and Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union could take, as they were all fighting it out. The United States wanted to wait it out and say, okay, now we can come in, we can help, and after the war, we can be in such a strong position that we can now dominate over you. And that's what they're doing in Ukraine. That's what they're doing in this proxy war. That's why the United States felt so emboldened to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline, because they knew Germany wasn't going to say anything about it. They knew Joe Biden, Antony Blinken, Victoria Nuland, Jake Sullivan, they knew Germany would say nothing because they wouldn't dare, because the United States knows that it has Germany and the rest of the EU completely under its thumb politically.
German industry itself, and soon the blue-collar workers that operate it, will all be relocating to the United States. Biden officially offered to take German heavy industry, chemical industry, and so on to the United States, where it will have a more stable energy supply, says the man who blew up Germany's previously very stable energy supply.
It's very obvious what they're doing. They're eating their allies, and then eventually they're going to turn inward and begin eating themselves. This is a cycle that we've watched empires do all throughout history, and we see the United States going down this same unfortunate path. They did not want Europe to have any sort of constructive relationship with Russia, because they wanted to encircle and contain Russia itself, and so they've cut all of these ties between Europe and Russia. They're left with the only option is getting much more expensive energy from the United States, and that will be indefinitely. That will never be as cheap as Russian energy was. And so, yes, the industry is going to have to move to the United States, but I don't think that is sustainable, and I don't think that Europe is going to recover as long as this is the arrangement and America has this influence over Europe. I think Europe is going to suffer.
Lastly, Brian, I'm always grateful for your wisdom. The US tried to scare people that there was an imminent transfer of weaponry from China to Russia. In other words, China dropping any pretense of being in any way neutral in the conflict. That didn't come to pass. Why?
Oh, well.
So before Brian gets into it, I just want to say this definitely has something to do with the German question, the Germany question, because Olaf Scholz has been going along with this U.S. narrative that China is going to send weapons to Russia, and there's a very contradictory narrative I'm going to get into right after Brian finishes his answer, because it gets right at the heart of how Germany will literally parrot anything the United States says, even if it means shooting itself, not just in one foot, the Russian energy foot, as Brian said. The U.S. doesn't want to see Europe, any part of Europe, but especially Germany, the biggest economic powerhouse, the center of Europe's economy, doesn't want to see Germany get close to Russia, but this includes all of Europe. It also wants to see Germany decouple from China as well. And while Olaf Scholz has said, no, I'm not going to do that, it has also gone along with these baseless rumors and just outright lies. And we're going to get into just how ridiculous the lies have become when it comes to China in a bit. But nonetheless, this has everything to do with Germany's subservience to the United States. And let's continue.
Well, it's hard to tell. You couldn't blame China for wanting to support Russia, because the United States has made it very obvious that China is next. They are going to be the next target. And everything that the US has done to Russia, they're also going to do to China. But we've been watching Russia. They have a very significant military industrial capacity. It seems to be doing much better than the combined military industrial capacity of the West. They have a head start. Maybe they don't even really need that type of support. China, India, many other nations around the world are supporting Russia in other crucial ways, helping them circumvent these sanctions that the US is targeting, the US and the EU are targeting Russia with. So maybe they really don't even need that type of support.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I just wanted to show you the interview because this has to do with Germany's subservience, because Russia does not need weapons from China. Okay, Russia's doing okay. Russia does not have the weapon shortages that Ukraine, that the Western media, the collective West media has been admitting has. Okay, they don't have it. And they don't have it because Russia's fighting a certain kind of war. They're not throwing everything they have. They're fighting mostly with the Wagner group, which is a paramilitary private contractor. It's not even the partial mobilization forces. So Russia's fighting a certain kind of war. But the point here is that Germany, okay, Germany has been parroting this contradictory narrative. They can't get their answers straight because during Biden's visit, the Chancellor Olaf Scholz afterward said to the media that it is warning China not to send weapons to Russia, and there will be consequences. We don't know what, but there will be consequences. So basically going along with Joe Biden here, just, completely kissing the ring, following him around like a child. Then, during a couple of days later, he meets for a press conference with Ursula von der Leyen, right? The European Commission president, and says this. He says that Germany's Scholz, so Olaf Scholz says China has declared it will not deliver weapons to Russia. So what he says here is that, and then van der Leyen says there's no evidence of this. He said that China declared it won't supply Russia with weapons for its war in Ukraine, suggesting that Berlin has received bilateral assurances from Beijing on the issues. So Olaf Scholz is saying here two different things within a matter of days, because there's some real politic here. The real politic here is that going along with whatever the US says is bad for Germany. It's bad for anybody, any country that decides to just go with the United States is making a huge error. Basically, what you're saying is that you want to be privatized, militarized, destabilized, and sent into chaos, because that's what's happening to Europe. It's much slower. It's not like when the US invades a country like Libya, or when the United States decides to wage a proxy war in Ukraine, right? Ukraine is just total destruction, right? From the battlefield, right? We're going to get into Bakhmut. From the battlefield to the economy, to the political situation, just total and utter catastrophe. That's what Ukraine is in, and that's because of the United States. That's because of an 8-9 year policy. Honestly, that's because of a 15+ year policy since the United States declared in 2008 that it was seeking to plunge Ukraine into its NATO apparatus. So essentially, Germany is saying, we'll do what's bad for Germany. We will be a subservient, loyal, not even junior partner, just a servant. We're just going to serve you. And then at the same time, we know, Olaf Scholz knows, Ursula von der Leyen knows, if you decouple, if you say we're going to shoot ourselves in the energy foot with Russia, we're going to destroy our relationship with Russia, and we're going to destroy this massive market in China. We're going to decouple from that. Well, if you thought the deceleration and decline of Europe's economy is bad now, you've seen nothing. You've seen absolutely nothing. So he is both saying, Olaf Scholz, that China is both needs to be warned because my daddy, the US, said so, and also saying, actually, this is not really proven, and Beijing told me that they weren't going to do it anyway. And we know since this rumor came out that China was going to supply weapons to Russia, if you have been thinking about how this conflict has been going, you know that this was never true. China has sent $0 worth of military aid to Russia since the conflict began. Why would it start now? Now, Brian is right. I agree with him. It wouldn't be out of the question or strange for China to want to support what is an ally, right? Especially because that war in Ukraine has existential meaning for China too. Just today in CNN, there was a leading opinion article saying the war in Ukraine has allowed the US to isolate China in the Pacific. Now, I didn't agree with the thesis. I didn't even want to bring it to the channel, but nonetheless, they're talking about it. You've heard Oliver North. You've heard so many folks talk about it. The Pentagon has said it. They've all said China's next. We don't want Taiwan to become Ukraine. They're building up to a war with China, and China knows it. So it's not out of the, it wouldn't be weird, right? It wouldn't be like, oh, wow, why is China doing that? However, China hasn't, and there are good reasons for that. China does not want to provoke the empire. China knows time is on its side. China's economy is growing. China is not having the issues that the collective West is having, and it doesn't need to become mired in a war when Russia has what it needs. Russia has the artillery, it has the men, it has the economic stability now, despite the sanctions. China doesn't need to go in and say, we're going to fight this war with you, Russia. They're doing enough just by being good bilateral and multilateral partners and allowing Russia to survive through the sanctions. That's enough. So China doesn't need to. I know a lot of people want China to do a lot more, but China doesn't need to, and Russia's never asked it to. So here we have a situation where Germany is completely subservient to the United States. It is incredibly bad for Germany as a whole. Working people in Germany are suffering from this. We don't even know the full extent of how badly this will go over the course of the next several years, because Germany essentially lost 40+% of its oil and gas revenue that used to be from Russia. Now it's being replaced by expensive US fracked LNG. So Germany's economy has suffered from some of the worst effects of all that has transpired since the Ukraine crisis. It is not going to grow. It's going to grow at a slower pace than Russia's economy, despite the fact that Germany and the EU and the United States have slapped thousands of sanctions on Russia. Germany doesn't have that problem, yet Germany is going to grow at a slower pace. That's how you know you have become a subservient vassal of the US empire, is when your national interests, your economic interests, your political interests are completely contradicted by everything that you do in the most momentous political, economic, and military conflict of the last generation. And that's what the Ukraine proxy war is. And Germany can't seem to get out of it. Olaf Scholz can't get his tail out from between his legs and stand up to Joe Biden and say, actually, we need to be equal partners here. We cannot be treated like this anymore. Nope. They're going to continue to keep the secret of Nord Stream, right? They're going to continue to keep that secret despite everyone knowing. If you have a thinking mind, you know that the United States blew up that pipeline. You've read Seymour Hersh's account. You know that the United States essentially committed an act of war, not just on Russia, but on an ally in Germany. And this just shows that the United States does not have any allies, any permanent allies, so to speak. It only has permanent interests. And what are those interests? It is to use Ukraine, use this proxy war as a way to cement not just domination over Russia, because that's the ultimate goal with Ukraine and China too. But really, it's Russia, target number one. Let's destabilize and dismantle Russia. But even if we fail, this is how the United States neocon establishment thinks. Even if that doesn't work, because the neocons are no stranger to their intervention's not working. Just look at what happened in Afghanistan. It didn't necessarily end up exactly how they wanted. However, they did get their pals that pay them and that give them their jobs a whole lot of profits, super profits, right? The military industrial complex made a killing. The CIA and all of the intelligence agencies, they were able to expand massively. The just the utter and total chaos and destruction that was had did have benefits. However, it didn't necessarily turn out how they wanted. They weren't able to permanently occupy Afghanistan. They weren't able to get Afghanistan stable, meaning their domination over Afghanistan stable enough so that they could stay present there forever. Because that's what the U.S., that's what the neocon establishment, the foreign policy establishment, that's what they want. They want a forever presence. They don't want just a temporary presence. They don't want to just get in and get out. This isn't 16th century colonialism anymore. This isn't let's occupy, steal, leave when things get a little too hard. No, this is about permanent war. And that's what Ukraine has always been about. And Olaf Scholz finds himself, and Germany finds itself mired in the United States' permanent war. And they cannot stand up for themselves. Now, there have been protests in Germany, and so we'll see how that plays out. We'll see if that can continue and if that can place political pressure on Germany's government to reverse course. It doesn't seem very likely, though, which means that that conflict between the people and the government is only going to sharpen because there's going to be a huge divergence in what people think on the ground and what the elite wants and pursues when it comes to this conflict and its consequences for German society. So that's what Germany has to look forward to for the coming period. And what we all have to look forward to and what we all have to pay attention to is how the United States is not just pursuing a war on Russia and China. It is seeking to essentially make the entire Eurasian landmass a protectorate of its. It wants the entire landmass to be subservient and subjugated under its diktats so that it can maintain this hegemony and this economic, political, and military stature that it built up after it became a superpower in World War II, and wants to maintain that in a period where the United States has absolutely nothing to offer. Nothing but war, nothing but austerity, nothing but chaos, nothing but destabilization, nothing but pain and suffering for the vast majority of people. And that's what the United States and its neocon establishment leading this ship, that's what they want to do. And that's what they are succeeding in doing for now with Germany. They're not so much succeeding with Russia and China, however, and that's a big problem.